Alright, so there's my mechanism plate ready to go. So I'll unhook the spring from the lever that operates the blade actuating ring, and I'm ready to start placing the shutter blades. Now the shutter blades, I have cleaned them all with naphtha after I polished them, and these need to be laid in place on the mechanism plate. The first blade has an extra hole in it which allows you to identify it, but it serves no other purpose. The blade is otherwise identical. You could put that blade anywhere, it would make no difference to the function of the shutter. So the blades are just laid out sequentially, moving anti-clockwise, and the blades are always put in this position, in the blade open position, so that they are supported by the mechanism plate while they're loose. Otherwise they tend to, if you try and assemble the blades with them in the closed position, you're always wanting to fall into the centre and it wouldn't be stable. Right, we've got the blades correctly placed on the mechanism plate. Start the assembly here, blade 1, blade 2, blade 3, blade 4, blade 5. The case only goes on in one position. Swing that round into position without disturbing the blades. 3 screws. Oops, my screwdriver obviously needs to be demagnetised. As usual, do the screws up lightly until they're all in place. And more importantly, with doing it, the case screws up like this. If a blade has become dislodged as you put the case over the mechanism plate, you don't want it trapped underneath getting damaged. So I check the action, and the blade's open and shut smoothly. I can do my 3 screws up tight. Check the action again. That's all good. Put our return spring on there. You can see the action there is snappy. That's all as it should be. And we can start reassembling the rest of the components into the shutter. Starting with the flash contact. Which presses down into the body and is held in with a single screw. Which is this one, and a lot of shutters that screw will be black or shiny brass. In this case it's nickel plated brass. Checking the action of that flash, and I can see that the contacts make well before the shutter blades open completely. And the contact is actually scraping on the actuator there, and so it would be shorted out. I'm going to bend that contact slightly so that the contacts make as the blades reach something closer to the fully open position. Yeah, it's still too much. That's better. The flash should fire when the shutter blades are fully open. That's better, quite happy with that. Otherwise you would have no problems with smaller apertures, of course, because the blades wouldn't need to open up quite so far before the full exposure was made. But at large apertures you wouldn't get the benefit. The flash would have fired before the blades had pulled out to the maximum aperture. So that's much better now, that's good. So that was certainly well out. It may never have caused a problem for anyone, of course, but it certainly was less than ideal. So I'll just take these components here and clean them as I put them in. As before, a little bit of naphtha on a cotton bud. This is the B lever here that I'm putting in. And I'm just checking that the B lever screw that holds it in place is actually clean as well. Fortunately for us it is. And the B lever fits here. The retainer screw has a little shoulder on it that the lever pivots around. If I can get the thing in. Of course my screwdriver is magnetised, so it'll cause me problems. It's always fun trying to run screws in with your left hand when you're right-handed. Get that. Run that screw down, check that the lever moves smoothly, nip that screw up. Do not over tighten that screw. If you over tighten a shouldered screw like that on an aluminium mechanism plate, what happens is that the shoulder on the screw will bite into the aluminium mechanism plate and effectively crush up on the lever that's supposed to be swivelling around the screw and stop it from moving freely. So be aware of that, don't go mad doing that up. It'll come back and bite you. So we have our 500th of a second speed spring, the high speed spring, and I just put a tiny smear of molybdenum paste in the centre of that for lubrication, and it doesn't need much. We have this lever. This lever in this shutter gives us our B setting, or engages with the B lever to lock the shutter in the closed position, in the open position when set to B, while you have your finger on the release lever. And this needs to be, slides in underneath that high speed spring. And the spring on the lever tucks down, and there's a groove in the side of the body that that spring tucks into. Now I'm looking at that, and I notice that fouls that flash contact. Now that contact is obviously a nuisance. I'm just going to have to reshape that contact again. That was fouling that lever. No, it's still fouling it. That flash contact is certainly not good. It's free of that. What's it like as a flash contact? Yeah, now it's approaching some usefulness. I'm watching very closely. The tail on this flash contact tends to contact the lever just at that point, which is not good or appropriate. I'm going to take that flash contact out so I can deal to that. There's something really wrong there. Looking at it from the side, it's quite distorted. And it's got an odd wear pattern to it as well. I'm going to check that with an electronic flash. I've just fitted the little catch that holds the shutter in the cocked position. Its spring hooks on behind the B lever to operate the B lever. And the shutter release lever goes on next. And I'll just wipe a tiny white of molybdenum paste on that so that it is free on its pivot and also is free on the arm here. When the shutter's set to the B position, this lever would come up out of the way and it would hold the shutter open at that position. That looks good. I'll clean the main lever and then install that on there, and we'll see if the shutter operates correctly. Right, that's all clean, so I'll just wipe a little bit of molybdenum paste around the inside edge. Around the outside, this catch here holds the shutter in the cocked position. This lever here operates the retard gear train, works against the main lever of that. And the bird pawl picks up this tab here to open and close the blades. So that's all good. We can fit this into position. Pull back that B lever so that it's out of the way. Pull back the, oh, I picked up a bit of rubbish there. Pull back the pallet lever, pull the arm back on the retard gear train, hook the spring over that post for the main lever, pull that tab back so it's free to go, check that that's all sitting correctly. Pop back up, get that back down, that back down, that's sitting there ready waiting to be cocked. And I'm going to take the shutter speed cam, clean this. That's quite clean. I suspect that the shutter has been serviced before, and that whoever serviced it was probably very sparing of lubricants. I'm using molybdenum paste here and virtually nothing else. I used a bit of graphite powder in some places. There's a commonly referred to belief that shutters require no lubrication, which is quite incorrect. It was probably originally stated that the shutters require no oil, and that certainly is true. But anything mechanical doesn't run well with absolutely no lubrication. Metal surfaces running over each other don't enjoy it. That's the B setting, and our 1/10 of a setting, which should be somewhere around about here. That sounds believable. A 25th of a second should be noticeably quicker, and it is. So our retard gear train is probably set correctly. I'll check my timings on my shutter tester, but that sounds credible. And at 1 second, that sounds credible too. So I believe that that's all as it should be. I'll check my 500th of a second speed. Now on the 500th of a second speed, that engages this extra spring. And to set that, first you set it to a 500th of a second, then you cock the shutter, not the other way around. And that's as it should be. Now that 500th of a second spring is not sitting correctly now. Something's moved. I think it just jumped to the wrong side of the cocking lever. main lever. Swing that round again. Let's try it there. It wasn't being tensioned. It was being tensioned the first time I tried it. The second time I think the tail of the spring had jumped underneath the main lever. That's sitting correctly. I've cocked that shutter. I'm going to put the speed cam on top of it in this position. Make sure that the B lever is not trapped underneath the plate. That's correct. That's good. I'm checking the 500th of a second of speed. That's good. That's all working correctly. So when I was testing it, after I tested the 500th second speed the first time, as I went to cock it the second time, I'd allowed this plate to lift and that spring had tucked back under the main operating lever. So that's all working correctly. And I can fit this plate back on. Rotate that to lock it in place and get my screwdriver, which is that one, and rotate the lock in place. That's good. 500th, yeah, there's quite a noticeable difference in the tension required to set the shutter between a 250th and a 500th because of the extra tension required for that spring. There's our shutter looking good. I'll test that on my shutter speed tester, make sure that the speeds are appropriate, and assuming that they are, and they certainly look good to me at the moment, I'll just carry on and close the rest of the shutter up. I'm just cleaning the front lens component and the centre lens component. My first task is to remove the old grease from the focus adjustment at the front of the shutter, and you can see that's quite dirty. There wasn't much grease in this one, I have to say. Normally there's a little bit more than that. Again, that points to this camera having been serviced before and whoever serviced it being somewhat less than generous with lubricant. That's okay, as long as it gets some lubricant. It's good to go. And the inside thread of here too, of course, that being the other half of that adjustment. Again, there's not much lubricant in there. That was quite dry. I'll be lubricating it a bit more than that. I'm just generally cleaning up this mount now. And this centre group will be getting screwed back into the shutter body. I have to clean the glass surfaces on here. Looking at the inner surface, the one that goes towards the shutter blades, is a little bit hazy. So using domestic glass cleaner on a cotton bud, I'm cleaning that surface, and you'll see that I'm rotating the cotton bud as I go to present a new surface to the glass as it goes, to help guard against accidentally picking up a shard of grit or dust and grinding it into that lens. So I blow off that surface, and checking that surface, I'm looking at the reflections on that surface in the window light beside me, making sure that that surface is clean. and it all looks good. I can screw that back into the body of the shutter. And I'll just do that up finger tight as I could get that. Alternatively, I would use a friction tool. I certainly wouldn't put a clamp or anything else on there. It certainly doesn't require that sort of force. Now that component I've popped in there, I'm going to clean its outermost surface. Again, I'm using reflected window light here as I inspect that lens to ensure that it's all nice and clean. There's a little bit of fluff there. That'll be off the cotton bud. I'll just pick up that thread, get rid of it. It's still there. Yes, that looks good. I'll check the fit of the front group in there. Check that the thread runs smoothly, and it does. So there's no roughness there, that's good. I need to clean the inside surface of the front component. Again, I'm holding it so I can see from the reflected window light how clean that glass is, and I'm rotating that cotton bud as I go. That surface has got a bit of haze to it, a little bit of oily haze. Might have to have one or two goes at cleaning that. It should be remembered that there's oil or there's grease going to be used to lubricate the threads of this assembly, and inevitably some of the volatiles will come out and settle on handy surfaces like these two glass surfaces. It's pretty good. Once more, and then I think I'll put it in place, and then I'll clean the outside surface and check. I think I've got that good. Sometimes you need to use something which is very good as a degreaser. So I'll pop that loosely into place. Clean that front surface so that I can inspect that whole assembly better. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with the look of that lens assembly. We'll take that front group off. I'll take that centre group out because I saw a speck of something sitting on the blades that I'd like to see the back of. That's better. And I want some lubricant on this front lens element there before I screw that into place. This is a bit of synthetic grease. It requires very little. I'll apply a little tiny dot in about 5 or 6 spots around the rim, and that should do. It's nice and smooth, provides a bit of damping, I suppose you'd say, compared to how it was previously. Previously it was a bit dry and rough feeling. Now it's smooth, a damped feeling to it, it's good. It's ideal. And the shutter really just lacks its rear group. So I'll put some naphtha on a cotton bud and go around the mount. Make sure any dirt or grease is lifted off from there. I notice that the rear group is serial numbered and of course matches the serial number on the front. So we know that this isn't some bodge of mismatched parts. That looks good. I just used a friction tool to tighten that down slightly because that was certainly not tight when we started. And I want to clean this rear surface, which is most definitely not clean. Because the rear surface is tucked inside the camera, only accessed when you've got the back of the camera open, it's very rarely cleaned by anyone. It very rarely requires cleaning, of course, but what that does mean is that it can collect the occasional accidental smudge when someone's put their thumb on it while they've been putting a new film in the camera, or some dust or dirt has got in there unobserved, and that will certainly have an effect on your photos. Well, that's all good. And we've just got to fit the outer parts now of the that being an aperture setting lever, and at the front of the camera our focus scale ring, which of course will not be fitted until this is back on the camera and I can check the entire focus. So first off, I'll clear some space, clean these components with a wipe of naphtha. There's not much dirt coming off these parts, or grease, or anything else for that matter. Some spots on the back of this ring here. I'm not sure whether that's from the paper washer or whether it's corrosion. I think that's surface corrosion actually, see if that'll scrape off. My concern here is just that if there are lumps and bumps, it means that the shutter won't fit back as smoothly as otherwise might have done. Here they are, they're just little tiny corrosion patches. And I would imagine that it means that at some stage the front of the camera was damp, and the moisture in those paper shims has caused corrosion to set up on that plate. There's nothing serious there, and it's certainly not going to cause a problem with the camera. This piece, how does all this fit? Well, that obviously fits on there. And this piece, well, that fitted through there. And this gets peeled back up out of the way. I should be able to hook that pointer through there, and I can. And that sits on there. This plate is located with a screw here. That was that screw with a very shallow slot in it. It was somewhat awkward to engage. Oh, don't say that's going to go on without a fight. I'm surprised. Get that plate centred up. That's that. Our setting lever had another screw here, a chrome plated one. Just checking the action here, certainly appears smooth enough. And I know that the reluctance to move there has nothing to do with the internals, and it will only be the mechanical fitment of the control rings at the back. And a little bit of friction there is a good thing. Now at the front of the shutter, we have our pointer to stop that the focus setting comes up against. I'm just looking at this. I thought they had mismatched screws there for a second, but I think I was probably wrong. Run one of the screws in lightly. Then run its mate in. They're quite short screws, but quite broad across the top. so they don't want to stand up on their end when you're trying to line them up with a hole. I want to tip over. That's good. Tighten those two screws up, that's good. And those are the stop that the focus scale ring comes round to. That pin on the focus scale ring comes round to that stop at the infinity position. So that's good. That shutter is ready to go back in the camera. We have our paper shims here. This was the innermost one, and you can probably see on that it's got matching spots on it from the corrosion on that rear piece there. That is ready to go back on the camera. And so if you're just servicing a shutter, that's pretty much all you'd need to do. Now it'll be back onto the camera and then you can adjust your focus. And I see that my video camera battery is busy telling me it's just about flat and needs to be recharged. So I'm going to stop right here and carry on work on the rest of this camera, which you don't need to see because I'm only showing you how to do the shutter.